The howling consumed everything. Wind that sounded like something alive, something furious, tearing through the Los Angeles streets at 2 in the morning, turning the world into a blur of white and ice and the kind of cold that stops a heart. Aria Morgan crouched in the abandoned doorway of a shuttered pharmacy on 5th and Main, her own coat wrapped around the small girl pressed against her chest, and her fingers had stopped working maybe an hour ago. She could not feel them anymore. That was not good. She knew it was not good because she was a nurse's aide, because she had worked double shifts at Mercy Elder Care for 14 months straight, because she had learned what the body tells you when it is shutting down. Temperature dropping. Visibility near zero. The road sealed by ice for 7 miles in every direction. The child was 7 years old and her name was Emma, and she was blind and she was shaking so hard that Aria could feel the tremors moving through the small bones under her jacket like a bird being hunted. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Aria whispered into the darkness above Emma's head, her voice barely audible beneath the wind. "Just a little longer. Just stay right here with me." Emma's small hand gripped the fabric of Aria's uniform, the one with the coffee stain from the morning shift and the torn hem that she had been meaning to stitch for 3 weeks. "I'm cold," Emma said, her voice so small it broke something inside Aria's chest. "I can't stop being cold." "I know, baby. I know you are." Aria pulled the child closer, thinking of the shelter where Emma had been living, the one run by volunteers who did their best with almost nothing. Thinking of how she had first met Emma 3 weeks ago during her break, how the child had sat alone in the corner, how something in that isolation had spoken to something broken in Aria herself. How Aria had started bringing her the leftovers from the elder care facility, the meals that families did not finish, the sandwiches that would have been thrown away. Now this. A blizzard that had trapped them both when Aria walked Emma back from the community center, the roads freezing faster than the weather service had predicted, the GPS on Aria's phone dying at exactly the wrong moment, the two of them running for shelter into the first empty doorway they found. Her right foot had no feeling in it either. That was when the light cut through the white. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows emerged from the wall of snow like something rising from water. Headlights blazing. Engines so quiet they barely made a sound. The vehicles pulled to a stop directly in front of the doorway, and the doors began opening, one after another, and men stepped out wearing tactical gear and moving with the kind of precision that only came from training. From discipline. From knowing exactly what violence looked like when it was orchestrated correctly. Aria's arm tightened around Emma instinctively. Not in a way that pulled away. In a way that said, "I will not let you go." The lead man was tall, built like someone who had spent his life understanding the mechanics of power, and he was shouting into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "We found her, boss. We found Emma. She is alive." Then the doors of the center SUV opened and a man stepped into the blizzard like he did not feel cold at all. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and his shoulders were broad enough that the black cashmere coat hanging from them seemed to drape like a cape. His hair was dark, perfectly groomed despite the snow, and his eyes, even from this distance, even in the darkness, were the color of storm clouds. There was a thin scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a pale line that caught what little light existed, and his face was structured like a piece of architecture, all sharp angles and planes and something that looked carved from marble. He moved toward them and each step was deliberate, measured, controlled. The tall man who had been shouting into the radio stepped back immediately. That was when Aria understood that what she was looking at was not just power. It was the kind of power that made other powerful people retreat. The man stopped directly in front of the doorway. He looked down at Emma, still pressed against Aria's chest, and something shifted in his face. It was subtle. A tightening at the corners of his eyes. A deepening of the lines around his mouth. But it was there. "Emma," he said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that could not be broken. "My name is Nicholas. I am your brother. I have been looking for you for 3 years." Emma's small hand released Aria's uniform and reached upward, her fingers finding the air like she was searching for something she could not see. "I have been alone," Emma said simply. She was stating a fact. "Everyone leaves me alone." "Not anymore," Nicholas said, and he crouched down, moving slowly so as not to frighten her, and when his hand touched Emma's small face it was gentle. His hand was large enough to cover her entire cheek, and his thumb moved carefully across her skin like he was learning her the way she learned the world, through touch. He looked up then, and his eyes found Aria. They were no longer soft. They were storm-dark and sharp, and they contained the kind of intelligence that sees through pretense instantly. "What is your name?" he asked. "Aria," she said. Her voice came out trembling like a candle in the wind. "Aria Morgan." "Aria Morgan," he repeated, as if he was cataloguing the name somewhere deep. "You saved my sister's life tonight. You did not know who she was. You did not know that by protecting her, you were protecting the one person in the world I have been searching for since the day my own brother sold her location to enemies who wanted to use her as a weapon." Aria had no words. She had $5 in her pocket and 3 days to find $125,000 to save her own sister from kidney failure, and she was crouched in a doorway at 2 in the morning holding a blind child who was not hers, and now a man who looked like he owned the night itself was telling her that she had saved someone important. "She will not be alone anymore," Nicholas said to Emma, but his eye stayed on Aria. "And neither will you, Aria Morgan. That is a promise I do not break." One of his men, the tall one, the one who had shouted into the radio, stepped forward with a blanket, and another appeared with a heated car waiting, and Aria felt Emma being gently lifted from her arms, felt the loss of the child's weight, felt the space where the small body had been begin to fill with cold again. "Come," Nicholas said, extending his hand. His wrist was wrapped with a silver watch that probably cost more than every possession Aria owned combined. "We are going to get you both warm. We are going to get you both safe." And in that moment, suspended between the blizzard and whatever was coming next, Aria Morgan did not know that this decision, to protect a child when she had almost nothing to protect, would bind her to a man who controlled the entire underworld of Los Angeles. She did not know that Nicholas Valenti had been hunting for his sister for 3 years. She did not know that his own brother had betrayed the family to a rival organization, selling Emma's location as a way to create leverage, to create pain. She could not see any of that. Not yet. What she saw was a man offering his hand to someone who had been invisible for so long that she almost did not recognize what rescue looked like. She took it. The moment her palm touched his, something shifted in the night. A door closing on the old world. A door opening onto something no one could predict. Now, let us go back to the beginning. 3 days earlier, when Aria Morgan was just trying to survive one more shift. The coffee was cold and it tasted like it had been sitting in the pot since 5 that morning. Aria did not mind. She drank it anyway, standing in the employee break room at Mercy Elder Care at exactly 5:45, watching the numbers on the clock change one more time toward the start of her shift. Her nurse's aide uniform was white, or it had been once, and her shoes had a crack running across the left toe that she had been meaning to fix, but there was never money for shoes and there was never time to find someone who could fix them cheaply. $5. That was what lay on the break room table in front of her. One $5 bill. She had counted it twice. 3 times. In 3 days, she was supposed to have $125,000. Her sister Lily was 22 years old and she had kidney failure, and the experimental treatment was not covered by insurance, and without it, the nephrologist had been very clear, without it Lily would need dialysis for the rest of her life. Maybe 10 years. Maybe less. Aria had been saving for 8 years. 8 years of double shifts and eating the leftovers from abandoned meal trays, the sandwiches that patients did not finish, the applesauce cups and pudding cups and the scrambled eggs that were going to be thrown away anyway. 8 years of sleeping in her car between the evening shift and the night shift, of using the gym at Mercy to shower because she could not afford her own apartment, of saying no to everything that cost money. She had saved $121,000. Then her landlord had been evicted and the new landlord had raised the rent by 40%, and Aria had lost that money in a single month trying to keep a roof over Lily's head. Then there had been emergency surgery for her mother, who lived in a care facility in Riverside, and another $3,000 had vanished. Now she had $5 left. And 3 days. The phone call had come that morning, at 6:15, while she was driving the 40 minutes to work. Dr. Patel's office. Lily's results had come back. She was declining faster than expected. If they were going to do the treatment, it had to be this week. Friday at the latest. That gave them the weekend for Lily to recover, and then she could go back to work at the coffee shop where she made $8.55 an hour. Ms. Morgan, the voice on the phone had said, "We need to confirm the payment arrangement before we can schedule the procedure." Aria had not said anything. She had just held the phone to her ear and listened to the silence between them, that vast space where words should have been. "Ms. Morgan?" "I am here," Aria had finally said. "I am trying to figure out how to tell you that I will have the money by Friday. I just need to figure out how." It was a lie. The kind of lie that felt like swallowing glass. She finished the cold coffee. Her shift started in 4 minutes. The facility was one of the better elder care places in Los Angeles, which meant it had clean linoleum floors and functioning air conditioning and the smell of antiseptic instead of decay. The residents were people who had money, or their families had money, and the staff moved through the hallways with a particular kind of efficiency. Work fast. Smile. Invisible. Aria Station was the 3rd floor, the wing where the patients with dementia and Alzheimer's lived. She would be helping them wake up, helping them dress, helping them eat breakfast, and then she would clean the rooms and change the linens and help with bathing, and then it would be time for lunch, and then the activities coordinator would lead the residents to crafts or a video, and then dinner, and then she would help them to bed. 14 hours. If her relief showed up. If there were no emergencies. She had been working at Mercy for 2 years and 4 months. She had never missed a shift. Not once. It was on the 3rd floor, while she was helping Mr. Chen with his shirt, that she heard the commotion coming from downstairs. Loud voices. Men's voices. The elevator dinging. The sound of footsteps that moved with purpose, with formation, like choreography. Mr. Chen looked toward the door. "Is something happening?" he asked. His mind was mostly gone, but he could still sense disruption. They all could. "Nothing," Aria said, smoothing his collar. "It is just some visitors." But she knew that was not true. Mercy Elder Care did not have visitors that arrived in formation. Mercy Elder Care did not have visitors that sounded like that. She finished with Mr. Chen and moved to the next room, and the next, and it was not until nearly an hour later, when she was restocking the supply cart, that one of the other aides pulled her into the break room. "There is a man downstairs," Keisha said, and her voice had changed into something different. Something that mixed fear and respect in equal measure. "He is asking about the residents. About a particular family. People are saying he runs something. Something big. Something that nobody talks about when his people are in the building." Aria's hand stilled on the stack of bed sheets. "Which family?" she asked. "Does it matter?" Keisha said. "People like that do not just show up in facilities like this. That means someone did something. Someone messed up." Aria did not think about the man again until her shift ended at 8 that evening. She walked to her car, a 2009 Honda Civic with 138,000 miles on it and an air freshener that had not been fresh since 2018, and she sat in the driver's seat and she looked at the $5 on the passenger seat. $125,000. In 3 days. That was when she remembered the community center shelter, the one that operated in the basement of a shuttered church on 8th Avenue. That was where she had been volunteering her Tuesday evening break for the past 6 months, because she understood what it felt like to have almost nothing. That was where she had met Emma, the 7-year-old blind girl with no family and no prospects and no one who seemed to notice that she existed. She started the car and drove toward 8th Avenue. The homeless population of Los Angeles moves with the seasons and the weather, and with winter coming, the shelters were starting to fill. She walked inside at 8:45 that evening, and the first person she saw was Emma, sitting alone in the corner like always, her thin fingers running over a piece of fabric, a blanket, maybe, or an old shirt, learning it the way blind people learn the world. "Hi, sweetheart," Aria said, and she sat down beside the girl. Emma turned toward the sound of her voice. "You came back," Emma said. "I came back," Aria confirmed. "I always come back." And she would. Because nobody else did. The 4:56 a.m. alarm on Aria Morgan's phone buzzed exactly 3 times before she silenced it. 3 times. She was learning to count her life in smaller and smaller units, minutes, not hours, dollars, not paychecks, breaths, not days. She sat up in the back seat of her 1998 Honda Civic, a blanket tangled around her shoulders like a cocoon that had failed to transform her into anything but what she was. The car smelled like stale coffee and the ghost of a life she used to live. The steering wheel was cold under her palms. Outside, Los Angeles lay sleeping in the darkness before dawn, and Aria Morgan climbed out of her car at Mercy Elder Care Facility with a weight of $125,000 pressing against her chest like a stone she could not put down. She clocked in at 4:52 a.m. Her supervisor Martha was already at the desk, sorting medication cups with the efficiency of someone who had done this for 17 years and expected to do it 17 more. "You're early," Martha said without looking up. "Second double shift this week," Aria said. "I'll take whatever hours you have available." Martha's hands paused over the medication cups. She was a woman in her 50s with grey streaking her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by anything anymore. She looked at Aria then, really looked at her, at the dark circles under eyes that had cried themselves hollow, at the uniform that hung slightly loose because Aria had stopped buying groceries and started collecting the uneaten meals from residents' trays. "When's the last time you went home?" Martha asked. "Home is overrated," Aria said. The smile she offered was the kind of smile that cost nothing to produce and everything to maintain. "I prefer the back seat of a Honda. Better parking." Martha did not laugh. She turned back to her medication cups, but her shoulders had dropped an inch. "Room for 12 is asking for someone. Mrs. Chen. She gets anxious with new people. You remember her from Tuesday?" "I remember," Aria said. She had been working at Mercy Elder Care for 8 months, since the day her sister Claire's doctor had sat across from them in a hospital room with fluorescent lights that made everything look like a photograph of death, and said words that had reorganized the entire structure of Aria's world. "End-stage kidney failure. 6 months, maybe. Could be 3 if her health declined. A transplant was her only chance, but the surgery itself cost $125,000 upfront, before insurance, before anything. And the waiting list? The waiting list alone was 6 to 9 months, unless they could accelerate her to emergency status, which required payment within 72 hours. Aria had looked at her sister then, at Claire, who was only 26 years old and had done nothing in her life except exist and be kind, which did not seem like it should warrant the price of a small house, and she had felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built very carefully to keep despair from flooding in. The hospital bill sat on her dashboard now, the paper gone soft from being unfolded and refolded so many times. Current balance, $8,340. Time remaining, 72 hours. The gap between these two numbers was the entire width of her life. She moved through the facility with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make every motion count. Room for 12 was at the end of the east corridor, where the morning light came in pale and thin through industrial windows. Mrs. Chen was sitting up in bed, her hands folded on top of the blanket, her eyes tracking the sound of footsteps approaching. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Aria said. "Is that the young one?" Mrs. Chen's voice was papery, fragile. "The one who reads the stories." "That's me," Aria said. She began straightening the room, collecting the tray from last night's dinner, wiping down the bedside table, running her eyes over what remained uneaten. A piece of toast. A fruit cup with maybe half the peaches still intact. She had learned to do all this without making it obvious, without letting her hunger show on her face. She helped Mrs. Chen wash her hands and face. She combed out her thin white hair. She talked about the rain that had fallen overnight and the way the garden outside the window looked after rain, full of color. She did not talk about money or time or the way her own hands were shaking because she had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and even then it had been someone else's abandoned lunch. At 8:14 a.m. her shift ended. She did not go home. Home was a studio apartment in Koreatown that cost $950 a month and took up most of her paycheck, leaving nothing for food or gas or the slowly accumulating medical bills. Instead, she walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat, and opened the container with the fruit cup from Mrs. Chen's tray. The peaches were soft and sweet, and she ate them slowly, tasting each one fully because she had learned that if you paid attention to food, you could trick your body into feeling more satisfied than it actually was. She ate the toast too, even though it had been sitting in the open air for hours and had gone slightly hard. Then she drove to a gas station and spent $4 on a bottle of water and tried not to do the math on how much she had left. $3. That was all that remained from the $5 she had started with yesterday. She sat in the parking lot of the gas station for exactly 19 minutes, then she turned the car back toward 8th Avenue. The Beacon Street shelter occupied the basement of an old church that had closed its doors in 2009. The building above was boarded up now, forgotten, but below ground, in that cold concrete space that had once echoed with hymns, a woman named Sharon ran a shelter for the city's invisible people, the ones without addresses or documentation or families, the ones the system had decided were not worth saving. Aria had started volunteering here 6 months ago, on her Tuesday evening breaks. She had started because she understood something that other people did not seem to understand. She understood what it felt like to be nobody. Emma was sitting alone in her usual corner when Aria arrived, one of her small hands trailing across a piece of fabric, an old blanket, threadbare and faded blue. Emma was 7 years old and blind, and nobody seemed to know where she had come from or who her family was. The intake paperwork just said no next of kin identified. That was all. That was enough to disappear a child into the system. "Hi, sweetheart," Aria said, and she sat down beside the girl. Emma's head turned immediately toward the sound of her voice. Her other hand reached out, found Aria's knee. "You came back," Emma said. "I came back," Aria confirmed. "I always come back." She pulled something from her pocket, a prayer card, worn soft as cloth from decades of being held. Her mother had left it to her, along with nothing else of value. It showed Mary holding a child, and on the back, faded words, "For protection in the darkest nights." Aria had carried it with her through every darkness she had ever survived. "Let me tell you a story," Aria said. A real story about a girl who was invisible, but she didn't stay that way. Emma's face changed. She leaned closer, her fingers finding the fabric of Aria's sleeve and holding it like it was the only real thing in the world. Outside, beyond the basement windows that sat at ground level, the afternoon had turned gray. The weather forecast on the radio in Sharon's office was warning about a blizzard moving in from the north. Record lows. The kind of cold that could kill. All residents advised to remain indoors. Aria did not hear the forecast yet. She was telling Emma a story about a girl who had almost nothing and a man she had never met, a man who moved through the world like a weapon wrapped in Italian silk and gold, and she was making up every word as she went, because she did not know then that this story was about to become real. What she could not have known was that 7 blocks away, in a corner office on the 34th floor of a steel and glass building that reflected the grey sky like a mirror, Nicholas Valenti was looking at a photograph of a 7-year-old girl with red hair and no eyes, because her eyes had been sealed shut by an accident that had happened 8 years ago, an accident that had cost him everything that mattered except the empire he had built to keep everyone else from ever losing what he had lost. What Aria did not know was that this girl in the photograph was his daughter. What she did not know was that the men who had caused the accident were still alive, and one of them was walking through the Beacon Street shelter right now, wearing an expensive coat that did not belong among the desperate and displaced, looking at the volunteer with the hollow eyes and the small child holding her sleeve like it was a lifeline, and thinking very clearly about how a girl with nothing could be made useful for very specific purposes. The rain started at 3:19 in the afternoon. By 4:15, it had turned to snow. The radio in Sharon's office crackled with warnings about a blizzard moving in from the north. Record lows. The kind of cold that could kill. All residents advised to remain indoors. Aria did not hear the forecast yet. She was telling Emma a story about a girl who had almost nothing and a man she had never met, a man who moved through the world like a weapon wrapped in Italian silk and gold, and she was making up every word as she went, because she did not know then that this story was about to become real. What she could not have known was that 7 blocks away, in a corner office on the 34th floor of a steel and glass building that reflected the grey sky like a mirror, Nicholas Valenti was looking at a photograph of a 7-year-old girl with red hair and no eyes, because her eyes had been sealed shut by an accident that had happened 8 years ago, an accident that had cost him everything that mattered except the empire he had built to keep everyone else from ever losing what he had lost. What Aria did not know was that this girl in the photograph was his daughter. What she did not know was that the men who had caused the accident were still alive, and one of them was walking through the Beacon Street shelter right now, wearing an expensive coat that did not belong among the desperate and displaced, looking at the volunteer with the hollow eyes and the small child holding her sleeve like it was a lifeline, and thinking very clearly about how a girl with nothing could be made useful for very specific purposes. The rain started at 3:41 in the afternoon. By 4:15, it had turned to snow. Aria finished her shift at Mercy Elder Care at 5:33 p.m., her hand still pruned from helping bathe residents, her uniform damp with someone else's spilled soup. She pulled on the thin cardigan that was all she owned against the weather and stepped outside into a wall of white. The wind had teeth. It cut through the parking lot in gusts that made her stumble, made the few cars still parked there look like frozen monuments to a world shutting down without her. She had promised Emma she would check on her before the shelter closed for the night. She had $5 in her pocket. No coat, because she had given her only coat to Mrs. Chen in room 304 who kept saying she was cold. No phone, because she had sold it 3 days ago for grocery money. No options. The walk to Beacon Street shelter was 12 blocks. In normal weather, it took 20 minutes. In a blizzard, the world became something else entirely. The streets emptied like water draining from a sink. Neon signs flickered through the white, their light fractured and strange. Aria's breath came in clouds that the wind immediately scattered. Snow accumulated on her eyelashes, melted against her face, froze again. At the shelter, she found chaos. Sharon was moving residents in an organized panic, her voice steady but her hand shaking as she directed people toward the buses parked out front. The heating system had died. Just stopped working. No mechanical explanation, no warning. One moment the radiators were hissing and clanking, the next, silence and cold seeping through every wall. Aria, thank God. Sharon grabbed her arm. We're evacuating everyone to the downtown center. But the buses are full. We're running out of room. Where's Emma? By the window. Aria, you need to leave. Get somewhere safe. The forecast is saying this is going to be historic. Aria moved through the crowded hallway and found Emma standing alone by the tall window, watching the snow fall in sheets so thick you could not see the street. The 7-year-old's shoulders were hunched. Her small hand was pressed against the cold glass. Emma. Aria knelt beside her, and the child turned, her blind eyes searching for the sound of Aria's voice. Everyone's leaving. Emma's voice was small. Factual. Terrified. I know, sweetheart. Am I leaving too? Aria looked out the window. The snow was falling so hard now that the streetlights looked like they were glowing inside a snow globe being shaken by an angry hand. The buses were loading. Sharon was calling final boarding. Most of the children had already been placed. But Emma, who could not see, who had already been betrayed by the world once, stood beside Aria like she was the only solid thing left. No, Aria said. I'm not leaving you. Sharon found them at the door. Aria, the downtown shelter is 12 blocks. You'll never make it in this. Then we find somewhere closer. Aria wrapped her cardigan around Emma's small frame, though it barely covered the child's torso. She took Emma's hand and stepped into the blizzard. The cold was not a temperature. It was a force. It was a living thing that attacked from every direction at once. The wind came in gusts that nearly knocked Aria off her feet, and she had to lean into it, had to use it as a pushing point to move forward. Emma's hand was small and trembling inside hers. Snow accumulated on the child's red hair, turned it white. They moved through the empty streets like ghosts. Abandoned storefronts. Closed restaurants with chairs stacked on tables. A movie theater dark and sealed. Christmas lights still strung in windows, now outlined in ice. Aria's thin uniform soaked through within minutes. Her legs were numb. Her teeth chattered so hard she feared they might crack. "I'm so cold," Emma said after 10 minutes. "I know, baby. Keep walking. We're almost there." They were not almost anywhere. Aria was making that up. She was improvising survival the way she improvised meals from leftover trays and conversations with a daughter she could not afford to save. But she kept walking because Emma was walking, because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was death wrapped in silence. 15 minutes in, Aria's vision began to blur. Her hands had gone beyond numb into something worse, a burning sensation, needles and fire. She could barely feel Emma's hand anymore. The buildings began to look the same. She turned a corner and found an old doorway, a recessed alcove carved into the brick of a building that might have been a bank or a library or a monument to something that no longer mattered. She pulled Emma inside. The wind was still there, but the snow came in sideways rather than as a solid wall. Aria sat down on the concrete, her back against the cold brick, and pulled Emma onto her lap. She wrapped her arms around the child and held her like she was the most valuable thing in the world. Because she was. Emma's small body shook against hers. Aria whispered the word she had memorized from the prayer card she kept in her pocket, the card her mother had pressed into her hand 15 years ago before the cancer took everything. "The storm will pass," she whispered. "The storm will pass, and you will be stronger for it. And I will not let you go." Emma's breathing slowed. Stabilized. She was falling asleep, which was the body's surrender to the cold, which was dangerous, which Aria knew and could not prevent. 30 seconds of wind against the doorway. 60 seconds of both of them shivering so hard the concrete beneath them seemed to vibrate. Then headlights cut through the snow like a blade through fog. 3 black SUVs screeched to a stop in the street. Doors flew open. Men in dark coats moved with military precision toward the doorway. Their faces were hidden in the snow and shadow, but their bodies spoke the language of purpose. Of capability. Of absolute certainty. The first man dropped to his knees in front of the doorway. Tall. Built like a truck. A scar ran across his jawline like a lightning bolt. "Emma." His voice was rough, urgent. "Emma, can you hear me? My name is Enzo. We've been searching for you. Can you hear me?" Aria's arms tightened around the child. Her voice came out fractured, barely a whisper. "Don't touch her." Enzo's eyes moved to Aria. Dark eyes. Calculating. Then something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, of what she had done. "We're here to help. That's Emma Valenti. We've been searching for her for 3 years." The other men spread out, securing the street. 2 of them remained by the SUVs. One spoke rapidly into a radio. The words medical and hypothermia and immediate transport crackled back. Then he stepped into the doorway. Nicholas Valenti moved like darkness made solid. He was tall, mid-30s, with dark hair and scars on his knuckles that spoke of a life lived in violence and survival. But what struck Aria most was his eyes. They had seen too much. They had carried too much. And in that moment, when they landed on the small child in Aria's arms, something cracked inside them. He knelt slowly, as if afraid sudden movement would shatter what he was seeing. "Emma," he said, and his voice was no longer the voice of a powerful man. It was the voice of a father. "It's me. It's Nicholas. It's Nico." Emma's blind eyes turned toward his voice. Her lips trembled. "Nico? I'm here." Nicholas's hand shook as he reached out. I've got you. I've got you now. I'm never letting you go again. Aria released her grip. The medical facility was all white light and humming machines and people moving with practiced efficiency. Aria woke to the sound of her own breathing and the weight of heated blankets across her chest. And ran into her arm. A monitor beeped with the rhythm of her heart. A nurse checked her vitals, made notes, smiled. You had severe hypothermia, the nurse said. Possibly closer to stage 4. Another hour and you wouldn't have made it. Aria's voice came out raw. The little girl. Emma. Is she? She's fine. Stable. She's been asking for you, actually. Asking if the cold lady is okay. A door opened. Enzo stepped in, his expression unreadable as stone. Mr. Valenti would like to speak with you, he said. When you're ready. Nicholas's office existed on the 34th floor, high enough that the city spread below looked like a map someone had drawn. The walls were glass. The desk was dark wood. The man behind it was studying her with an intensity that made Aria want to disappear. Enzo and Dario flanked him. Both men stood perfectly still. Both radiated the kind of power that comes from absolute certainty in one's ability to destroy. The silence stretched. You saved my sister's life, Nicholas said. I didn't know she was your sister. But you saved her anyway. Aria met his eyes. She was a child who needed help. That's all I knew. Nicholas studied her for a long moment. Then his gaze moved to her hands, which were wrapped in bandages. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. The doctors said you gave her your coat. You had no phone. No money. No shelter. You could have left her at any point. Why didn't you? Because no child should be alone in a storm. Enzo and Dario exchanged a glance, the kind of look that passes between men who have witnessed something unprecedented. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Valenti, they had never seen him interact with anyone outside his immediate circle with anything approaching gentleness. What do you need? Nicholas asked. What? You're working double shifts at an elder care facility. You're sleeping in your car. You're eating leftovers from meal trays. What do you need? Aria's defenses rose like a wall between them. I don't need anything from you. That wasn't a question. Then here's my answer anyway. I saved Emma because it was the right thing to do. Not because I wanted something in return. I don't owe you gratitude. I don't owe you anything. She stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. How long was she missing? Aria asked, her hand on the door. Nicholas's voice came from behind her, quiet and heavy with the weight of 3 years. Since she was 4 years old. My brother sold information to enemies. They took her to use as leverage against me. I've been searching ever since. Aria's expression softened. She understood something in that moment about what it meant to lose everything and keep searching anyway. I'm glad you found her, she said, and she meant it. Dario's report arrived on Nicholas's desk 2 days later, a full background check laid out across the polished wood like evidence in a trial. Aria Morgan, age 26, employed at Mercy Elder Care, volunteers at Beacon Street Shelter. Sister Claire Morgan in kidney failure, needs $125,000 for emergency transplant surgery in 72 hours. Current savings, $8,340. Current pocket money, $5. Nicholas's jaw tightened as he read. What do you want us to do? Enzo asked. Pay it. Boss. Anonymously. She won't accept help from me directly. So she won't know it came from me. But get it done. Today. What Aria did not know was that in the same moment Nicholas was making that decision, 2 other people were watching her carefully, measuring her desperation, calculating how much pressure it would take to make her break. Douglas Hale sat in a penthouse overlooking Los Angeles, his predatory smile reflecting in floor-to-ceiling windows. And Cordelia Blackwood, wealthy beyond measure, cruel beyond mercy, was on the phone, her voice like honey laced with venom. "So Nicholas Valenti has taken an interest in some nobody caretaker," she said. "Exactly the type I've been looking for," Douglas answered. "Desperate. Isolated. No family except a dying sister. Give me 2 weeks," he continued. "I'll turn her. She'll be mine. And then we'll have leverage over the most dangerous man in this city." Cordelia's laugh was sharp as glass. "Do what you do best, Douglas. But if she becomes a problem for my plans, I'll handle her myself." The next morning, Aria received a call from St. Mary's Hospital. The administrator's voice was careful, official, confused. "Miss Morgan? There's been a development. Your sister's surgery has been paid in full. By an anonymous donor. $125,000. She's approved for the transplant. Surgery is scheduled for tomorrow at 8 a.m. Aria's hands shook as she held the phone. She was sitting in her car in the employee parking lot at Mercy Elder Care, and she began to cry, deep, racking sobs that came from somewhere deeper than tears, from the place where hope had been buried under months of impossible arithmetic. Someone had saved her sister's life. Someone whose name she did not know. Someone, she was beginning to realize, who owed her a debt she had never asked him to incur, and who was collecting it now in ways she did not yet understand. Rain hammered against the windshield like bullets. Aria Morgan's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles had turned white, the pale bone showing through thin skin. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, in, out, but no amount of breathing seemed to fill her lungs with air. The parking lot behind Mercy Elder Care was empty except for her 10-year-old Honda, its windshield wipers struggling against the downpour, the headlights of a passing car sweeping across her face and making her squint. 2 minutes ago, Douglas Hale had been standing in front of her car with his predatory smile and his voice like honey laced with venom. 2 minutes ago, he had told her that her sister's new medications could become very expensive. Very unavailable. And Aria understood what that meant. Claire was barely a month out of surgery. Her immune system was fragile. Without those anti-rejection drugs, the transplant would fail. Claire would die. Aria's vision blurred. She reached for her phone with shaking fingers, the screen glowing bright in the darkness. Her thumb hovered over the emergency call button. But who would she call? She had no family except Claire. No friends with enough power to stand against someone like Douglas Hale. No one. She was completely, utterly alone. The worn prayer card fell from her visor onto her lap. Her mother's last gift, the edges soft and creased from years of handling. The words written in fading ink, "The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think." Aria's eyes closed. Her whole body shook with silent sobs. Maybe I'm not strong enough this time, she thought. Maybe I should just disappear. Let him take someone else. Let the rain take me. Her phone buzzed. One text message glowing on the screen, "Can you visit tomorrow? I miss you. Emma." The text sat there, simple and small and utterly devastating. One tiny thing. One small connection that meant she was not completely invisible. Aria pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. She took one shaking breath. Then another. Then she sat up, wiped her eyes, and started the engine. She did not know that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. 2 miles away, in a luxury office tower overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Nicholas Valenti stood motionless in front of floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the entire city spread out like a map of his power. The rain fell on the glass, streaking downward in crooked paths. Behind him, Dario Moretti held a tablet displaying surveillance footage, his voice steady but his shoulders tense with what he needed to report. "The warehouse at Port Terminal 7, Dario said. "We have Douglas Hale's operation mapped. 12 locations across the city. At least 40 women currently in his network. And 6 weeks of surveillance showing he's been circling Aria Morgan specifically." Nicholas did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the rain-streaked windows, on the city below, on the small points of light that were cars and buildings and the lives of people who had no idea what was happening in the shadows above them. "How long?" Nicholas asked. "Since the night we brought her to the medical facility for her sister's emergency blood work." He started tracking her schedule that same night. Watched where she worked, where she slept, where she volunteered at the shelter with the children. Enzo Romano stepped forward from where he had been standing near the door. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Valenti, Enzo had learned to read silence the way other men read newspapers. He understood what the silence meant. "You're going to move against him," Enzo said. "I'm going to hand him to the Kozlov family," Nicholas replied. His voice did not change in tone or pitch. It remained level, controlled, like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "My brother worked with them when he betrayed us. They know what happens to men who prey on the vulnerable in this city. Douglas Hale is about to learn that lesson personally. And he's going to learn it in a way that sends a very clear message about what happens when you threaten someone under my protection." Dario nodded slowly. "When?" "Tonight. 2:19 a.m. I want every location hit simultaneously. I want every victim evacuated and protected. I want Douglas Hale to understand that he has nowhere to run." The office was so quiet you could hear the rain against the windows, the soft hiss of the city's nighttime breathing far below them. "And Aria?" Enzo asked. Nicholas turned from the windows. His eyes were the color of winter, dark and fathomless and absolutely still. "She doesn't find out until it's over. She doesn't get dragged into this. She stays safe and she stays clean. That's the only protection that matters." The raid began at 1:57 a.m. 12 men in black tactical gear moved through Douglas Hale's warehouse operation like ghosts made flesh. They wore no identifying marks, no insignia, nothing that connected them to anyone or anything. They simply existed as instruments of precise, coordinated violence, and they moved with the efficiency of men who had done this before and would do it again. Enzo led the first breach through the main loading dock. The doors exploded inward, hinges shattering, metal screaming against metal. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness like blades. And then the screaming started, not from the team, but from inside, from the women who were being held in rooms that smelled like sweat and despair and the kind of fear that burrowed into your bones and never left. "Evacuate them," Enzo commanded. "Safe house protocols. Medical assessment for everyone. Move." The second, third, and fourth teams moved through the remaining warehouse sections. They found Douglas Hale on the third floor, running for a back exit, his face twisted with panic, his expensive suit already torn at the shoulder. He burst through the metal door into the alley behind the warehouse, and froze. Nicholas Valenti stood waiting for him. He wore a charcoal grey cashmere coat that cost more than a year of Douglas Hale's childhood salary. Behind him stood 6 men in dark suits, their shoulders broad, their faces absolutely expressionless. And parked behind them, their headlights off but their engines running low and quiet, were 4 black SUVs with Russian license plates. The SUV doors opened in perfect synchronization. 4 men stepped out. They wore dark tactical uniforms that suggested military precision and professional violence. Their faces were carved from something harder than bone. The leader, a man with silver threading through his dark hair and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, nodded to Nicholas Valenti with the respect of one professional acknowledging another. "The boss sends his regards," the Russian said. His accent was thick, his English carefully pronounced. "We have been looking for new routes through the port. This one tried to operate without paying tribute." Douglas Hale dropped to his knees. His hands flew up in a gesture of surrender that was also a gesture of absolute desperation. His voice came out as a whimper, "No. Please. No, no, no. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was connected to you. I'll disappear. I'll leave the city. I'll leave the country. Please." Nicholas did not respond. He simply turned away. The rain continued to fall, cold and relentless, washing the asphalt clean of footprints and evidence and mercy. The Russian enforcers grabbed Douglas Hale. He screamed, actually screamed, a sound like an animal caught in a trap that was tightening second by second. They dragged him toward the open door of the SUV, his hands clawing at the air, his legs kicking uselessly against the concrete. "Valenti! Please? I'll do anything." The SUV door slammed shut. His screams continued for exactly 3 seconds before the vehicle's soundproofing sealed them away. Then there was only the sound of engines and the rain and the quiet breathing of Nicholas's men as they watched the Russian vehicles drive into the darkness, carrying Douglas Hale away into the city's underworld. He would never be seen again. He would never be heard from again. He would simply vanish, the way men vanish when they make mistakes large enough to demand their complete erasure from existence. Meanwhile, across the city, Cordelia Blackwood was preparing for bed in her penthouse apartment. The space was all marble and gold leaf and windows that looked out onto the sprawling lights of Los Angeles below. She wore silk pajamas imported from Milan. Her hand held a crystal glass of wine that cost more than Aria Morgan earned in a month. Cordelia had been riding high on a specific wave of confidence for the past 6 weeks. She had positioned herself carefully in Nicholas Valenti's social orbit, spreading rumors and invitations, using her wealth and her family name as tools to pry open doors that other people could only dream of entering. She was working him slowly, the way a shark circles prey that doesn't yet understand it's being hunted. But she had made one critical mistake. She had assumed that her wealth and her social standing made her untouchable. The federal agents arrived at dawn, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. They came with a warrant and a list of financial crimes spanning 15 years, and they came to her penthouse while she was still in her silk pajamas, still holding yesterday's glass of wine, still believing that she was the smartest person in every room she entered. The arrest was made on the courthouse steps at 9:27 a.m., exactly timed so that the cameras would be present, so that the news crews would capture every moment of Cordelia Blackwood being led away in handcuffs, her expensive designer outfit suddenly looking like a costume from a failing production, her perfect hair disheveled, her face streaked with tears and smudged makeup. The charges were specific: securities fraud, money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. 40 years minimum federal prison. Her assets frozen. Her social circle abandoned her within hours, the way sharks abandon a sinking ship. By noon, her name was trending on social media. By evening, every news outlet in the city had run the story with gleeful editorial commentary about the fall of yet another wealthy person whose money had not, in the end, saved her from consequences. She had screamed at the FBI agents during the arrest, her voice shrill and desperate, "This is Nicholas Valenti. He's the criminal, not me. He's the one who should be in handcuffs." The senior agent had simply looked at her with mild disinterest and said, "We have evidence of 15 years of securities fraud and money laundering." Mr. Valenti provided all necessary testimony as a concerned citizen. Aria Morgan did not learn what had happened until 3 days later. She was sitting in the break room at Mercy Elder Care, eating a sandwich that she had brought from home, white bread and mustard, nothing else, when her phone buzzed with a news notification. The headline read, "Human Trafficking Ring Dismantled, 40 Women Rescued from Port District Operation." Below that, major federal investigation targets wealthy socialite, Cordelia Blackwood arrested on fraud charges. Her hands went numb. The sandwich fell to the table. She scrolled through the articles with trembling fingers, reading about the raids, about Douglas Hale's warehouse, about the women being placed in protective custody and receiving medical care. She read that Douglas Hale himself had disappeared during the operation, handed over to Russian organized crime, the articles speculated, though the police had no official statement. She read that Cordelia Blackwood was currently in federal custody awaiting trial. She read all of it and understood, in the way you understand something fundamental about the world, that none of this was coincidence. None of this was random chance. This was the work of someone with power beyond measure, someone who had been watching her, protecting her, orchestrating events from the shadows in ways she could not have comprehended. She pulled up Nicholas Valenti's contact information in her phone. She had never called it, never texted it. She simply had it there, a number that seemed to exist outside of normal reality. She stared at the screen for 3 minutes. Then she called. He answered on the first ring. Aria. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Are you safe? Did you? She could not finish the sentence. Yes, he said simply. You are safe now. Both of you. And you will remain safe. This I promise you. Aria closed her eyes. Through the break room window, she could see the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds, the kind of light that arrives after a storm passes. The kind of light that suggests the possibility of clear skies returning. Why? She whispered. Because, Nicholas Valenti said, the debt I owe you cannot be measured in money or favors or the usual currency of my world. You saved my sister when she was helpless. So I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that you are never helpless again. Not in the way you were. Not on my watch. The line went quiet except for the sound of rain, or maybe that was just the sound of her own breathing, finally steady, finally calm. 3 weeks had passed since Douglas Hale vanished into the city's underworld like a man swallowed by the earth itself. Aria stood in the doorway of the bright wing of Nicholas Valenti's estate, watching Emma's small fingers move across piano keys with the kind of grace that only comes from seeing the world through touch. The afternoon light fell in slanted rays across the polished wood, and for a moment, Aria forgot to breathe. You came, Emma said, her face turning toward the sound of footsteps, that 7-year-old certainty that always knew exactly where Aria was in a room. I was waiting. Aria crossed the space and wrapped her arms around the child, pressing her forehead against Emma's dark hair. Of course I came, sweetheart. I always come. Emma leaned back in her arms, and there was something almost dangerous in the innocence of her next words. Nicholas has been different lately. Happier. I think it's because of you. The statement landed like a blade through silence. Aria's heart skipped. She pulled away slightly, searching the child's face even though Emma could not see her searching. What do you mean, baby? He talks about you, Emma said simply. Not a lot, but I can hear it in his voice. The way his breathing changes when someone mentions your name. He cares about you. Maybe he loves you. Aria stood frozen. The piano room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. She thought of the medical bills that had mysteriously vanished from her mailbox. The apartment lease that appeared with a deposit already paid. The grocery deliveries that came every Thursday morning, filled with exactly the foods her sister Claire loved. The way Douglas Hale's advances had stopped abruptly, completely, as if a hand had reached out and erased him from her life entirely. Emma, your brother and I barely know each other, Aria whispered, but the words felt like a lie even as she said them. Emma reached for Aria's hand and squeezed it with the kind of certainty only children possess. He paid for your sister's surgery, didn't he? The one she needed so badly. Aria's entire body went rigid. She had never told Emma about the surgery. She had never told anyone except Nicholas and her own sister. How do you? I heard him talking to Enzo about it, Emma continued, undisturbed. He's been protecting you for months. He made the bad man go away. The one who was bothering you at the clinic. The one who smelled like cigarettes and cruelty. Everything clicked into place like a lock opening. The anonymous bank transfers. The quiet way Douglas Hale had stopped appearing at Mercy Elder Care. The sense of being watched that had gradually transformed from terrifying into something that felt almost like safety. All of it. All of it was Nicholas. Footsteps approached from the hallway, measured, unhurried, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone accustomed to moving through rooms and having them rearrange themselves according to his presence. Emma, give us a minute, Nicholas said from the doorway. His voice carried no edge, but there was weight in it nonetheless, the kind of weight that made even children obey without argument. Emma squeezed Aria's hand one more time before rising from the piano bench. Don't be mad at him. He was just trying to help. She moved toward the door, and Nicholas stepped aside for her, his dark eyes never leaving Aria's face. When Emma's footsteps faded down the hallway, the space between them became a living thing. How long? Aria asked. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, like it was coming from very far away. Since the night you saved her, Nicholas said. He stood in the doorway, a man 6 feet and 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire monthly rent. His dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone caught the afternoon light. The moment I understood that you'd chosen to stay with a stranger's child instead of saving yourself. You had no right, Aria said. The anger felt right, felt necessary, but underneath it was something else, something that terrified her more than anything Douglas Hale had ever done. I know. He stepped into the room. One step. That was all. The surgery was 8 weeks ago. I insured the medical center accepted your sister's case. I covered the costs because the debt I owed you was already immeasurable. I didn't want to be saved, Aria said, and she could hear the trembling at the edges of her own voice. I wanted to survive on my own terms. I was going to find a way. I was going to earn that $125,000 myself. And you did, Nicholas said quietly. He moved closer, not threateningly, but with the same measured pace of his footsteps. The money gave you time. But everything else, rebuilding your life, staying strong, protecting yourself from men like Douglas Hale, keeping your sister alive through the surgery's recovery, that was all you, Aria. I simply ensured you had the space to do it. That is not saving. That is protection. There is a difference. Aria felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent 3 years after her mother's death learning that the world would take from her if she gave it the chance. She had learned that asking for help was the same as admitting defeat. She had learned that the only way to survive was to do it alone, to let no one close enough to leave, to trust absolutely nothing but her own hands and her own determination. But that was before a blizzard. Before Emma. Before Nicholas Valenti had appeared in a doorway with death in his eyes and gentleness in his movements when he looked at a blind child. Why? Aria asked. Why protect someone you didn't know? Why risk your empire, your operation, everything you've built, for a woman with $5 in her pocket? Nicholas came to stand before her, and she could smell the cold that clung to him from outside, mixed with something like sandalwood and very expensive leather. Because somewhere between watching you fight for your life and watching you refuse my help even when you desperately needed it, I stopped being able to look away. Because you're the first person in 15 years who has asked for nothing from me except that I see you. And I see you, Aria. I have seen you since that night in the doorway. Aria's breath caught. The prayer card she had carried for 5 years felt heavy in her pocket, the one worn smooth from constant touching, the one that read, "The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think." The trafficker, she said. Douglas Hale. What happened to him? He will never touch another woman again, Nicholas said. That is all you need to know. Did you kill him? No. Nicholas's expression did not change. I handed him to people who have their own justice system, their own way of ensuring he will never operate in this city again. He is alive. But he will wish he was not. The women he trafficked are being returned to their families. The operation he was part of has been dismantled entirely. That part is finished. Aria should have been horrified. She should have recoiled. Instead, she felt something like gratitude rise in her throat, thick and complicated. Thank you. For what? For making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. For protecting those women. For. She stopped, searching for words that felt large enough. For seeing me as more than someone to be saved. You were never someone who needed saving, Aria, Nicholas said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from very deep inside him, from a place he did not usually let anyone access. You were always someone worth protecting. There is a difference. One is about weakness. The other is about recognizing strength in someone and ensuring that strength survives long enough to change the world. The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled taut, dangerous, electric. The sound of rain began outside, soft at first, then steadier, drumming against the windows of the estate. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Aria could hear her own heartbeat, steady now, no longer the frantic rhythm of survival but something deeper, something that suggested roots and permanence. "I don't know how to do this," Aria said quietly. "How to be with someone like you. Someone who operates in shadows. Who makes people disappear. Who holds the kind of power that destroys lives." "Then we will figure it out together," Nicholas said. "If you want to." Aria stepped closer. She was not a woman who made decisions lightly anymore. She had learned that every choice carried weight, that every moment mattered because she had spent so long thinking she had none. But this choice felt different. This felt like standing at the edge of something that could either break her or rebuild her into something entirely new. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I should be, but I'm not." "Good," Nicholas said, and something shifted in his expression, a softening at the edges. "Because I have been terrified of you since the moment I saw you half frozen in that doorway, holding on to my sister like she was the only thing that mattered. That kind of strength is far more dangerous than anything I do." 6 months later, Aria still worked at Mercy Elder Care on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Her choice. She loved the work, the elderly residents, the rhythm of caring for people who had been discarded by a world that moved too fast to notice them. Her sister Claire had graduated from her community college program and was training to be a medical assistant. Emma came to visit twice a week, her confidence growing, her laughter filling spaces that had been silent for too long. Nicholas kept his distance in public. But in private, in the quiet hours of evening when the city lights reflected off the windows of his estate, what was growing between them was undeniable. Not built on rescue, but on equal footing. Not built on debt, but on genuine knowing. The garden was full of late spring flowers when Aria stood there with Emma, the child's small hands learning the texture of rose petals, the softness of jasmine blooms. "Are you and Nicholas together?" Emma asked suddenly, with that uncanny way children have of asking the questions adults dance around for months. "It's complicated," Aria said. Emma laughed, a sound like water over stones. "That means yes. Adults always say it's complicated when they are scared to admit they care about someone." Nicholas appeared at the garden gate, his expression transforming the moment his eyes found Aria. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, understanding, the beginning of something unbreakable. The storm that had trapped them both in that doorway had long since passed. But what they had built in its aftermath, the family formed from choice rather than blood, that would endure. The storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think. If this story moved your heart, please like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Comment below, what would you have done in Aria's position? Thank you for staying until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.